And now these bastards have come to ruin it for us.
Language, Mr. Jones.
Go to hell, your reverend.
Henry Williams, Church Missionary Society, known respectfully by the Māori as Four Eyes, the man chosen to translate the treaty.
If there's ever to be one.
Father to 11 children, a man described as arrogant, stubborn and fearless. Qualities apparently admired by the Tangata Whenua.
I have a letter from the Bishop of Australia requesting that I use my influence on the native chiefs to sign. To do that will require a treaty in a language they can understand.
Fathers, and they have a circuit of churches in a very large coastal parish they went round. So the Māori church had Mass only once a month, whereas the Pākehā church in town had Mass every day and every Sunday as well. And so I was expected to go to the town church on Sundays, ride a bicycle along a 4-mile metal road on a cold, frosty morning to go to church. But once a month we would go out to the Māori church out at Waiho, adjacent to our marae.
Both were Catholic, though, weren't they?
Both were Catholic, yes, but the difference was at the Māori church there was a Māori catechist who chanted the prayers in Māori, and the congregation responded. And that is in keeping with the Māori practice of karakia. It's part of the cultural roots, the chanting of prayers.
How do you feel
there
about...
was nothing like that in the town church.
No. How do you feel about the Catholic Church now? I mean, did you stay with it?
I began to question my faith very early in the piece, around about 8, 9, 10. On Mondays the nuns would conduct an inquisition about who was not or who was and was not at church on the Sunday. And those absent were told that they were committing a mortal sin and they'd be bound to hellfire and brimstone and eternal damnation. Now I thought to myself, that's when I began to question the value of going to church on a Sunday. If you are not going there out of free will, where is the good in it? And later on, when I went to St. Peter's Māori College, it was run like a monastic institution. And we were told that certain books were prohibited by the Catholic Church, such as Marx, Das Kapital, Aldous Huxley, Brave New World, and Darwin. Those books were prohibited, and those are the very books that we're told to read when we went to university. So very early in the piece, I was questioning my faith.
And it was presumably sometime later that you identified the church as part of the cultural invasion and colonisation.
Well, I knew of the Jesuit axiom, give me a child for the first 7 years and he is mine for life.
It didn't work with you, though, did it?
Well, it's that kind of indoctrination that I rebelled against because I believed in the concept of free will.
It's just that later I'm going to be talking to John Newton, who's written an account of James K. Baxter's community at Jerusalem, which, of course, was a blend of Pākehā and Māori and the Catholic Church, which was very present there. And I'm wondering whether you can see the church in a more benign light now.
No, I don't.
No, okay.
No. Look at all the exposure of priests and brothers interfering with little boys.
Well, yeah. I don't want to be a voice piece for the Pope here, but, just because somebody behaves badly doesn't mean the institution's going to hell.
Yeah, but we were taught that even to think about sex is sinful. That if you're going to communion on the Sunday morning, you have to purify your mind. You shouldn't be going to pictures and having having your mind contaminated by love scenes in the movies, that kind of stuff. And then at St. Peter's College, we were deprived access to newspapers in case our minds were contaminated by reading about rape cases.
Good Lord. When you came to marry Deirdre, who's a Pākehā, whose parents were of English origin, And who was an Anglican.
That dichotomy of Māori versus Pākehā is an artefact of British imperialism. And
by which you mean?
Well, the British Empire just expanded into the Pacific and took over the lands of indigenous people and did enormous damage around the Pacific Rim. And we're in the process of repairing that.
How's it going so far?
Well, I think we're in the state of nation building at the moment, and it's work in progress, and it's doing very well. We've made tremendous gains over the last 30 years. I'm very optimistic for the future.
But we'll never get there, will we? I mean, you've called one of your books Struggle Without End. We'll never get there.
Oh, we'll get there eventually.
Do you think?
It's work in progress, and there's still parts of the colonial baggage, what I call the colonial mind, that we still have to extirpate. For instance, the treaty settlement process is wonderful. The story is put on the table. It's entered into the historical record. Settlements are made, and the tribal corporate structures are set up, and they have some economic power. And once you have economic power, then you can speak as co-equals to the people who've dominated your life. But every now and again there is a regression, such as the foreshore and seabed debacle. And then more recently, the suggestion by the present government that there won't be Māori representation on the Auckland super city.
Well, they could argue, of course, that why should there be? We're alike enough now to rub along.
Because the ideology of democracy has its imperfections. And one of it is that the people who are the tangata whenua, the people of the land, who are a millennial culture, who were here 1,000 years and will be here 1,000 years hence, they will always be the outvoted minority. In other words, imperialism, colonization, constructs the people of the land as a minority.
Mm. What do you say to people who say that there are no indigenous peoples of New Zealand? The Maori arrived; they just happened to arrive a little earlier than everybody else.
Well, indigeneity has certain features about it. One, it's tribal. Two, it's kin-based. It's intense face-to-face relationships, small political groupings, and above all, it is the spirituality of indigenous people is such that they regard themselves as part of Mother Nature, not above it. And that spirituality creates a reverence for nature, whereas in the cultures of West European origin, there has been a separation between the church and the state, spirituality and the political economy. And it's that separation that allows the political economy to exploit the planet and cause environmental degradation and resource depletion. And that is something that the indigenous people are struggling against around the world, because the indigenous people have worked out their own systems of sustainable development, and that's all been put at risk by the exploitation of the present dominant culture that we live in.
I think that's what gets up people's noses most, if you'll excuse the expression, is the presumption that the indigenous people are nicer and better in all ways than everybody else.
I didn't say that.
Well, pretty roughly you did.
I didn't say that. The indigenous people, when they first arrived here, when my ancestors arrived here,
behaved very badly indeed. We're not nice to one another.
When my ancestors arrived here, they exploited the environment to the nth degree. Mm-hmm. They depleted the seal population. They wiped the moor out. And then as the population put pressure on the rest of the resources, they went out to explore for more land. And that was just a continuation of the story from Polynesia, from the Polynesian homelands to here. and an explorer called Hui Te Rangiora went into the Southern Ocean and reported back there was bull kelp and ice down there and no land that was inhabitable. In other words, there's no further land to be discovered, and that modus operandi should come to an end. And so from 1500 on, there was no more migration around the Pacific. And the rest of the culture, from that period on, the culture had to learn to adapt to the environment and manage its resources so that they were sustainable. And so such things as rotational harvesting of the eels in the Whanganui were developed.
However, they carried on beating each other to death on a regular
but that's
basis.
the history of humankind. Your own tribes,
So it is, of course.
Your own tribes in Britain did that.
Of course. No disputing that at all.
And
no
you just have to
disputing
go
that.
and see in the...
Ooh, baby, baby, it's a wild world, and it's hard to get by just upon a smile. Oh, baby, baby, it's a wild world, and I'll always remember you like a child, girl. Oh, baby, baby, it's a wild world, and it's hard to get by just upon a smile. Oh, baby, baby, it's a wild world, and I'll always remember you like a child, girl.
Is that rather than continue to bang our head against the brick wall, which is the imposed criminal system, we seek a way to walk around it. And to do that, we need to reclaim that faith in ourselves, to reclaim the understanding of what it is to be Māori, to be Indigenous wherever we live. Round about the same time, another one of my granddaughters was with me, and when I grew up I was lucky. I had a koro, a grandfather who was a great storyteller, and I tried to hand on to my grandchildren what he gave me, and the belief that you can learn so much through stories, and the belief that there are stories in the land, that no matter where you go in the land there are stories, and they are there waiting for you if you care to listen. And we were back home where I grew up and staying on our land, and I took this particular grandchild for a walk to show her a really special place in our history, which is a little pool on the banks of a river. It's a separate little pool where the water is so clear on a sunny day it shimmers like a mirror, and so you can see your reflection really clearly in the water. And we call it Waimarama, which has two meanings. Wai is water, marama means to shed light. So marama is our word for explanation, how to explain something. And marama is also our word for the moon, so it's like the light of the moon on the water. And our people believe that if you look into that water and you see your reflection, then you can imagine whatever you want to be. You can dream whatever dream you want, and the water will take your dream and help you make it become a reality. So I was explaining this to my granddaughter, and when we walked back she was quiet for a while, and then she said, well, we could imagine we could change the world, couldn't we? And I said, yes, my baba, we could. And so part of dealing with the issue of Māori and indeed Indigenous peoples in prison is for me to imagine a different world. And that necessarily means, in the end, for me and for our people, I believe, a world in which prisons no longer exist. On all empirical data, prisons fail. They do not rehabilitate, except in a tiny majority of cases where the factors leading to rehabilitation were probably already present. They certainly do not act as a deterrent, another supposed aim of incarceration. So on those empirical grounds alone, prisons don't work. And yet there is such a vested interest in the reality of prisons. Hundreds of research projects have been done at home, and I'm sure there have been hundreds done here in Australia, suggesting changes to the prison system. But nothing changes, nothing alters. They still have the same failure rate. More importantly, they still have the same potential to crush the humanity of people who are sentenced to them. And so if we are to imagine a world in which the full humanity and potential of Indigenous peoples is realised once more, then the removal of incarceration, the removal of prisons, is fundamental to that, it seems to me. Which brings me to the fourth thread of my new title, a hero. I think it's important to have heroes. I have lots of heroes. When I was thinking about this on the plane coming here, I realised lots of my heroes are women, and one of them is a woman I'm sure you've heard of, Angela Davis, who, as you will know, is not just a long-term advocate of prison abolition, but I think one of the greatest intellectuals alive today. And she said in a speech once that the fundamental question is, why do we take prisons for granted? Why do we see them as a given, as if there is no other possibility?